Welcome, everyone. Hello. Welcome to AR House Live. I'm Manon Mollard, editor of the Architectural Review. I'm here with Ruben J. Brown, the AR's digital editor. And I'm delighted that we've gathered you all here together for this conversation. It's one of the brilliant things about a virtual room. People from kind of all over the world can come together. We like to make these meetings where we get a sense of the virtual room. So we're very happy for you to, if you're comfortable, to turn on your camera so we can get a sense and see a little bit. Please keep yourself muted, of course, at least for now. I'll start with a short introduction. I wanted to talk a little bit about the AR House Awards. So at the Architectural Review, we very rarely publish single-family houses, but actually once a year since 2010 now, we do one issue each year that is dedicated to the AR House Awards. And this is because beyond its core function of shelter, the house is an object of fantasy, but it's also a very important testing ground for architects. So whether it's private family residences or small weekend outposts, hybrid live-in workspaces or communal homes, all the winning and commended projects of the past 15 years have demonstrated the flexibility of the notion of the home, as well as the imagination required to rethink and question architectural conventions. Designing a house enables architects to experiment with form and with materials, but also to radically rethink the ways in which we live our everyday lives. And particularly now, as the needs and expectations and possibilities of the home are also shifting. Over the last few years, we've all been spending a lot more time in our domestic bubbles. We're also, as a profession, starting to give more and more thought to households that do not conform to nuclear family structures. And as the effects of climate change are being felt around the world and extreme weather events are now increasingly common, architects are using their skills to design emergency homes. This is very important from a political and societal point of view, but also very exciting architecturally. So for the 2024 AR House Awards, the judging panel brought together Bunsum Premtada, who's founder of Bangkok Project Studio, who was shortlisted in last year's awards for his own home and studio. We also had on the panel Stella Daouti, who's co-founder of Architecture Research Athens or Area, whose weekend house on Salamis Island was commended in the awards 2021 edition. And the third member of the panel was British architect Mike Tonkin, whose practice, Tonkin Liu, has been lauded for inventive residential conversions of existing industrial buildings. The judges were interested in houses that broke the mold, with emphasis placed on rigorous plans that could offer surprise. They asked the all-important question, would I like to wake up in this home? And they considered how architecture could work in conjunction with bottom-up policies to help address the needs of marginalized communities. The judges' top 6 projects were all visited by a critic before a decision was made on the winner. And following the critics' reports and the photography that was commissioned, the judging panel chose the post-hurricane houses in Acapulco, Mexico, by Manuel Cervantes Estudio as the winner. So congratulations, Manuel.
Thank you.
This is a project that Manuel will obviously tell you more about. It was done in the aftermath of the highly destructive Hurricane Otis in 2023. And Manuel Cervantes Estudio, together with the non-profit organizations Asociación Gilberto and Construyendo, established the Contigo initiative to build long-term residences for people in Acapulco whose homes had been damaged or destroyed. Manuel Cervantes, who's obviously the founder of the practice, is, as you will have seen here with us today. He will tell us more about both the process and the project, so how and with whom the homes have been designed, how the initiative continues today. When we published the piece at the end of last year, there were 42 houses that had been completed and 78, I believe, were ongoing. So we'll hear a little bit more about what's happened since. And before I hand the virtual stage over to Manuel, I'd like to add that this year's winning and commended projects are all published in our latest issue, which is filled with houses, dreams, and ideas about what a home and a good room can be. This is its cover. We actually chose a photograph of Ettore Sotzas's virtual architecture, where you can see the sort of bare bones of a room that are entirely open to the surrounding landscape. So in this issue, we've published the different houses that were chosen by the judges as their top 6. So there's homes in Mexico, Australia, Colombia, and the UK. And it's also an issue in which we asked architects, curators, and writers to describe a good domestic setting, whether it's real, remembered, or imagined. And this makes up our Good Room series, which includes artworks and spaces designed by well-known architects, as well as responses that challenge the idea of what constitutes a room and reflections on the absence of satisfactory living spaces in certain contexts and overheated housing markets. You can, of course, visit architectural-review.com/shop if you'd like to order a copy. And it's really important for us to say that all orders from the shop, as well as subscriptions, help support the editorial work that we do at the Architectural Review. So today we're very happy to be continuing the conversation outside and beyond the printed pages. After Manuel's short presentation of the project, we'll be hearing from the judges, their comments and thoughts, and we'll start a conversation altogether about the work of Manuel Cervantes, the specific project in Acapulco, but also more broadly the design and construction of emergency homes, the impact of the climate catastrophe on the profession, and bigger ideas for new homes and new forms and ways of living. We'd like to ask you to use the chat box, but you'll also be able to put your virtual hand up by using the react button and virtual hand or raise hand. And then we'll be able to let you know when you can ask your question. And if you want, we recommend that you switch to gallery mode so that you can see everyone. But for now, I'm handing over Manuel, who's going to share his screen. Congratulations again, Manuel.
Thank you very much, Manon. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you to the jury for the selection of this project that wasn't our project only. It was, like you said, this big collaboration between private companies and associations. So we are very happy for the exposure of this kind of project in this relevant magazine. This is a picture after the hurricane.
Wait, Manuel, we can't see your screen.
Not yet?
Or I can't see it. We did do a little tech test. It was all working a few minutes ago. Let's try again.
Here we go.
I can't see it.
Okay.
Do you want us to share the, or is that not ideal, Manuel? We have your presentation, so we could share it.
Let me try it again.
Oh, that's loading now.
I want to avoid the...
We can see the first slide. Yeah, we can see the first slide of the presentation.
So, well, I was saying that this is the picture that we received, let's say, after the hurricane, devastation of the beachfront of Acapulco. And it was terrible to see that, let's say, the news were capturing only this, the high-end beachfront of a huge city. And we were thinking on what was happening with a big part of the community of Acapulco. Also, this was the real picture. This was the real, let's say, problem, because for obvious reasons, this problem, it can be solved with money that the people living in these places, they have it. But the problem is that the big part of the population doesn't have the money to recover. So we started, again, calling all the people that we have been working with in the last 10 years in this kind of projects. And we started this initiative that we call it Contigo. That means like with you. And in a way, the idea was to help a big part of the community, let's say, to find a way to start all over again. To understand a little bit where is Acapulco, this is Mexico, and in the red dot we have Guerrero, that it's one of the poorest states of Mexico, one of the most violent states of Mexico, and sadly one of the most problematic states of Mexico. This is let's say a timeline on how Acapulco, this bay or system of two bays, was developed. At the beginning of, 100 years ago, it was just a port, a small port in a very protected area of the bay. And suddenly in the 30s, let's say that the North American community and obviously also the Mexican community discovered this place as a destination. So the country created this destination, invented this destination, and for the next 20 years, it was, let's say, organized, designed as a touristic destination. Then the urban sprawl created this bigger area and started to have different areas around the bay. And for the 30 years, this is the picture of Acapulco. No, it's this huge, massive urban sprawl that used to be only a touristic destination, but today it's a huge city with almost 2 million people. The problem, and let's say that the reason of our project, is that all those years of urban sprawl created this social contrast on a touristic invention. I want to make clear the difference of a destination and a touristic invention. Normally, a healthy touristic destination, it's when people go and visit a vernacular or, let's say, old, beautiful community. So we as tourists, we visit a place, we understand how a people or a community live in a city or in a town. And let's say that it's about discovering a community and the city. But in America, and especially North America, for the last decades, we have been inventing destinations. We have been creating touristic destinations. So we don't go and see a community. We go and see a place, an invented place, and it's more like the shopping center complex. No, it's about a group of politicians, private investors creating a destiny and sending people to see this place. But then the community doesn't have any relationship with this invention. There is this big gap or big contrast between who's visiting a place and who's living in that place. Acapulco in the 40s used to be this. In the 50s, it used to be a high-end luxury invented destination, mainly for North American people. And it was this beautiful, nice weather, beachy area in the coast of the Pacific, Mexican coastline. And to understand a little bit what I'm trying to say about this contrast, at that time in the 50s, this movie came out, Fun in Acapulco, with Elvis Presley as the main character. And in this poster, you can see the beautiful urban strip right in front of the ocean, next to the beach. No public services, no public area, completely privatized. And all these people let's say, creating a community, people, tourists, locals, fashion, etc. And in these images of that picture, we can see through the story of the movie. Just to create a context, Elvis Presley goes to Acapulco, and he met a waitress, a beautiful waitress, and he wants to connect with her. So he decided to go where she lives. So he goes in his fancy car to this, let's say, weird part of Acapulco, where the waitress were living. And you can see in this picture that the reality of Acapulco is what we can see in the back. 70 years ago, Acapulco was this contrast, this social contrast between a high-end destination and a poor society, because they created that polarity. Again, Acapulco never was a destination to go and visit a community. It was about going to this privatized beachfront and never look at what was happening in the back. To make that point, you can see in brown the urban sprawl of Acapulco, and in black, let's say the touristic high-end destination. So as you can see, that contrast, it's really dramatic. Probably 5% of the population goes and uses this infrastructure for a small amount of time during the year. And the rest of the people, they live in the mountains, in valleys, in very bad conditions. And they work for this small fraction of in and out population. So this was the people, or this is the people that we were trying to work with. They lose everything. And well, that was a little bit of the context to understand, let's say, the site, the context, and the people that we were trying to work with. The team, as Manuel mentioned, it's a group of 3 entities: Construyendo MX, doing all the construction; Gilberto Association, doing for the last almost 30 years this kind of projects, and us helping them in a way to be a connection between the families and the people in need, and capacities to build and to fund this project. So in a way, it has never been an architectural project. This is more like a strategy to help people using architecture as one of the elements, or one of the key elements to resolve some issues. The first thing that we did when the Otis hurricane hit Acapulco was to gather this team and ask everyone on board for time. We decided at the beginning that this was not an emergency project. We were not trying to attend the emergency part of the disaster. The government was dealing with that. So we decided to collect money, to collect efforts and people, to have time to think on how to solve things. And these texts are trying to understand, like, the disaster as an accident, the emergency as a surgery, and the long-term as the therapy, that when we had a surgery, we need to really recover. So again, the project was not intended to help people right away, not the emergency. The idea was to help people in long term. So understanding that, we started the process on not only how to design the houses, but to select the community to help. This is Acapulco again, and these are the affected zones. Everything was affected in different levels, but in red was completely devastated. And then the yellow, the pale yellow, it's semi-affected. So we decided to go and see communities with real needs, communities with no social big problems, and communities in places, contexts without further or future risks. Because one of the problems of the urban sprawl of Acapulco is that a big part of the communities and let's say urbanizations are placed in terrible places, no? Places like mountains, flooded areas, earthquake regions. So most of the problem that we had on the hurricane was because the construction of these infrastructure, houses, and urbanism was misplaced. No? So it was important for us to find a community to help, but let's say to guarantee that the investment on that community was in the long term. No, thinking that sadly this happens very often. No, Otis hurricane was a year and a half ago, and a year later, Acapulco was hit again by another huge hurricane called John, a different kind of hurricane, but again, it was a disaster. And probably it's going to happen now and then, like we're seeing in California with the fires. It's something that sadly it's happening every year or every season. So we spend some time searching, looking at communities to help, and we decide at the end to help this one called Puerto Marquez. This is a zoom in, and these are a lot of the sites that we again decide to help. The process on how to decide or how to choose a site, it was, let's say, the result of three very important elements. The first one, a family in need, a family owning a site. It was for us important to find families with owning titles. Sorry. Secondly, these sites were, let's say, risk-free, like I was saying, to prevent any further problem with the investment. And the third one, a contract where the families sign with Gilberto and Construyendo associations some rules on how they're going to receive the help and how they're going to help other families around the area and how they're going to help us through the process by cleaning their site and helping the workers building the houses and some other, let's say, ideas that were very, very important to understand that helping sometimes is not that easy. Sometimes we need to create some circumstances to really help people and really help their communities. So that was the process of selecting the sites, and then the families or the people in need. Another relevant part of the strategy was to convince all the people involved on the funding and all the, let's say, companies and people investing in the project that the time to invest in the strategy, to invest in how to really help the people was also important to achieve quality and not quantity. Now, normally, governments and some private companies, they love to give money to these kind of associations in exchange of a quantity, in exchange of numbers. No? So it was very difficult to convince them that it's impossible to design a housing or a house solution as a system. No? So we convinced them again with this strategy to first create a specific dialogue with individuals or families to really understand their needs. A family, it's not always the same. In the context of Acapulco, we have very different kind of family structures. No, we have single mothers, we have single fathers, we have grandparents with their kids or grandkids. We have in-laws together. So it was very, very important to specify that the houses were about to be designed for a specific family or person. Then to create a contextual analysis of each site plot to understand topography, orientation, ventilation, sun orientation, and understand that a typology repeated several times, it's not a house. No, it's a system, and like every system, it can fail. Then the effective and efficient construction system, given the circumstances. And when I say given the circumstances, it's very important to understand that, like I was explaining, Acapulco, it's this huge contrast between not only classes or social classes, but also geographies or topographies. And through the time, this huge contrast created a terrible ecosystem, a social ecosystem. And today, all the, let's say, narcos and other terrible groups having taking control of the communities. So when the hurricane hit Acapulco, it was impossible to imagine to use any kind of material or construction system. Everything was, let's say, like putting on hold, and the ecosystem, the existing ecosystem, started to decide how to use the materials and stuff. You know, this is pretty sad to explain it, but the mafia was taking control of the situation. So under those circumstances, we decided to create a project with prefab elements and be able to send all the materials and not depending on the supply system of Acapulco that was completely destroyed. And at the end, the idea of progressivity of a house, you know, the idea that it's not a system, it's not a repetition system, it's a house that needs to think on how people, families, and future relatives will progress in a way. No, so it was important to think on a solution helping them in the next 50 years. No, not only again the emergency. So I'm gonna show first one site, one house, just to exemplify the idea on the process of design. So this is the site of a single person, Julio Zamora, 75 years old. The house was completely destroyed, even the trees were ripped off. So we took this and other houses, but again, I'm trying to exemplify the exercise with this one. And we tried to avoid the generic prototype of a house that normally, let's say, the government or governments in Mexico try to use. And we decided to use what we call pie de casa, and in English, I think that the term is starter home. And it's this concept about the idea of giving a beginning for the family, no? And a system or an architecture typology that will give these families the opportunity to progress and to evolve through time. Acapulco, it's a tropical region, and as a tropical region, we have a lot of wind, but a lot of sun exposure, high temperatures. So we decided to, again, explode the idea of the generic single unit house and to think in the elements that create nice architecture or places in this kind of environment. No, so the shade, the porch, and all these traditional elements of the architecture of this kind of weather was the, let's say, the first strategy to have all the eco techniques available for this kind of house. And we started with this diagram, understanding that a house or a home is not about the architecture, the envelope, or the space. You know, it's about how people relate to the outside, to the community, to the outside of the house, to the shaded part of the houses. So in this diagram, we were understanding all the parts of the life of Julio Zamora. No, obviously, the big porch in the front connected to the outside, to the street, in order to be part of the community, to avoid isolation, especially in an old person. And then understanding all the elements of his life. You know, he had some kind of elements to work with around that porch. The laundry area was next to a back patio, the bicycles, and other elements that again are the elements that someone needs inside or outside a house. And then it was about connecting all those points, connecting all those activities, and understand that sometimes we're just people floating in spaces doing stuff. No? So again, architecture was never relevant as architecture. What was relevant was the activities of this person. And at the end, the interior spaces, obviously, but also pretty well connected to the outside and pretty well connected with all these different activities. No, so let's say that was the concept for the houses attending this specific area with this beautiful landscape that they have, and understanding all the activities. So this is the result of this first house under the grid of a system. with the idea of using those materials that we sent from Mexico City. And again, understanding the relationship that for this kind of weather, it's very relevant, no, interior and exterior, and the flows, the natural ventilation, the breeze, and all the elements to create a space that doesn't need any mechanical assistance, no? The recollection of the water, cross ventilation, ports and overhangs for the sun. And this was the result of this first house. These are some pictures showing, again, the porch, the relationship of that porch and the street, the relationship of the interior with that lattice communicating and ventilating. And then we started designing so many different houses, sometimes for single persons, sometimes for 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and we went, I think, with the biggest one for 5 bedrooms. So we designed, or we create an exercise of designing a house, like I was saying, for a family on a specific site and then a specific condition. No, so we have houses of 1 story, 2 stories, even 3 stories, and everything again is arranged by the necessities of the people, the site conditions, neighbors, etc. These are different examples of houses on the same community, on the same circumstances. Different situations, but the same ideas, no, porches, places to hang out. This is another typology that I will describe later. These are some of the houses in their context. Some pictures of the families. Some of the houses receiving that progressive effect, no? The idea of how these slabs that are a little bit out of the facade are intended to receive other systems, no? To create bigger porches or to create even other spaces. The idea of progressivity, understanding also that a lot of these people, they use their houses as stores or workshops. No? A lot of them, they use the house not just to live, but also to work in. So we can see in these examples how they are using the porches to have little stores. And well, other pictures showing the philosophy. And then for the progressivity, we designed the system to show them the capacity of the houses to grow not only in a horizontal way, but also in a vertical way. So we create a manual, a system to show them how in the future they can go from 1 to 2 or even 3 stories, because that's the maximum of the system, 3 stories. So again, the house, this pie de casa, imagine that it's an investment on something that maybe at the beginning it's for 1 family, but even in the future can be 2 families, a store and 2 families, and in a way we are giving them the opportunity to understand how cities evolve. No? So we can see here the pie de casa, the first two levels, and how they can create a third level to have another family or to have more rooms upstairs. And that's it. I think that it would be great to jump into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Manuel, so much for the wonderful presentation, and congratulations again on being this year's winner of the AI House Awards. We will jump into that conversation now. For anyone in the audience, this is a moment to think about your questions. You can put those in the chat or raise your virtual Zoom hand if you would like to read out your question or say your question live. But to start off, I'm going to ask Mike, who's joined us, and Stella, two of our judges from the awards, maybe to start off by saying a few words about why this project in particular was chosen as this year's winner. And also maybe you could kind of start by asking Manuel a question as well. So Michael or Stella, if one of you would like to start up and give some comments on the project.
Stella,
and if you're able to stop sharing your screen as well, that would be great.
Sorry.
Not a worry. Sorry, Mike.
Hi, congratulations, Manuel, a really fantastic project. And I think we all really enjoyed the kind of social aspect of a project. And having seen your other work, it's really great to see that you're working on kind of both spectrums of society, where you're serving the people from what you showed us there, the people who are affluent enough to be able to afford to fix their own problems, and those who need the help. So congratulations on the great work. And I also enjoyed it in the kind of context of the other timber building you were building on the hillside as well, that you didn't show, but I thought was also admirable. One thing I'd like to know a little bit more about is actually the, so you told us that the system could be used to go to 3 stories. And I wonder if you can talk, because what I quite liked about it was the kind of relationship to the domino house, and how you're talking about a kind of a system, and that sort of goes back to when Le Corbusier was thinking about how architecture is a kind of system that's flexible and free, and this is exactly what you're kind of giving us. And you talked about the kind of rituals of life and how that how different people's rituals of living can be taken up by the flexibility of your system. But I guess I wanted to know a little bit more about how the panels work, because you talked about, or in the literature it talked about, that it's an insulation panel that's covered in concrete and has reinforcement in it. But I didn't quite understand how that worked and how the kind of forces were transferred through it. So it's a bit of a technical question, but I think that would probably help everyone understand how the system works.
Well, the system, I think that it's called SIP panel. And I think like pretty even old. It's a good isolation system. It doesn't need another structural element. No, it's self-destructive. And then at the end, it's only covered by this cement. We add some earthy materials to give some kind of context with the architect. Because I mean, the system is something that I didn't like when we started. I was willing to do something probably more related to the site and less industrialized. And this because we know that when you use an industrialized system in a region, in the future they are dependent on that system, you know, and that's kind of a colonialization way of doing things. But again, under the circumstances, this was the best option for that kind of weather and that kind of site. So we use it. And the technical aspects, I don't know if I'm answering that correctly, but again, it's a self constructed element, pretty well isolated, not only for the weather, but also for noise. And it gives you the capacity to do walls and slabs, not only partitions. And it can resist without columns and beams to 3 levels, no? And I mean, for me, that was a solution. It was a system to assist our problem or strategy. But it was only that. No, I think that probably if we do this again in another region, in another part of the world, the construction system will be not relevant. No, I think that the relevant part was to be able to use a system, but to attend the people and not the architectural part of the project.
I see. And you talked about this idea of kind of progression, and you talked about the limitation of just 3 stories. And we know that when people are successful, sometimes things just kind of grow and grow. Is there some way, you monitor what's happening with these buildings and make sure they're not taken beyond their limit? Is there some way of you, and did you do some destruction testing or failure tests to know where the system kind of has a sort of its safe limits?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have been not only monitoring the project, we're still working on it. Like Manuel was saying, we started, when we won this competition, we were at 42 houses. Now we are around 80. And the idea is that we will finish having 150 houses. Not only that, we started with a chapel, and we started with a small school with the same, let's say, construction system. Again, the SIP panel, it's something that was tested decades ago. Construyendo MX, our partners doing the construction, they have been doing this and testing this in other parts of the country in the last 15 years. So let's say that, yes, we are looking and even sometimes helping people that want to have like more spaces, how to do it, not only with this material, but with other kind of materials like I was showing in the picture. Because sadly, most of these families, let's say they are growing their houses with what they find. Sometimes it's trash. Sometimes it's someone else left. So I mean, to answer the question, yes, we have been in contact with all the families. We have been helping them to increase or to change things if they are in that need. And again, I think that the material was tested before we use it. We didn't choose something new or we didn't do an experiment. No, it was important for the long-term, let's say, project that this was actually a good solution.
Manuel, I'm also quite keen to have us talk about the kind of social elements of the project. I know in the judging that Stella, you particularly were quite taken by how these houses both offer kind of a sense of home and influence policy and social change as well. I wonder if, Stella, you'd be interested in touching on that and maybe asking Manuel about some of those elements of the project as well.
Yes, thank you, Manuel, once again for the lovely presentation, and congratulations. Just to say a few things about the deliberation, we had 3 projects in total, for which all 3 judges were right sure from the beginning that we wanted them to be in the top 6, and yours was one of those. So it really stood out, and it has a lot of strength through its simplicity, let's say. And this is something that that all 3 judges saw right away. Now again, at your presentation, I really liked the characterization of this project more as therapeutic housing rather than emergency housing. And that is a nice difference that this project offers, also through quality versus quantity. So these characteristics are I think, have a lot of value in what you've proposed. And taken from Ruben's remark, I would also like to ask you to tell us a bit more about the participation aspect of the project, and how people actually took part through that process. Was it something easy? Was it something that where you had to convince them through a lot of meetings? Also into account that the spaces that you proposed have a kind of minimum size, and they expand much more to the exterior. Was that something that culturally is easily accepted, or they wanted even more interior spaces, let's say? Thank you.
Well, thank you first for the recognition of a project like this. It has been a big exercise for us at the office, at the studio. And I mean, to try to answer the questions, it was very, very difficult to, let's say, talk with the families or the people that were under this emergency and ask them for time. No, obviously, a lot of these people, they were expecting to have a quick solution and a quick result. So it was a big process to show them the past governmental assistance and the result of that, to prove that those kind of projects are terrible. And again, ask them for time to think with them in order to understand the real needs. So that was, let's say, the first big difficult. Then we started the process that it was, again, not only architectural, it was about finding which of these families were eligible to have a house. Again, to see if they were owners, to see if they were willing to have the help, to see if they were willing not to have the governmental assistance, that it was kind of a contradiction with their project, because the government decided to help people, giving them things like refrigerators, beds, cement, gravel, and stuff like that. And a lot of people that receive construction material, they were let's say, monitoring by the government to see if they were really building something and not selling the material. So it was very difficult to convince the people not to receive that assistance in order not to build something that was not intelligent, and to wait again, to wait to design their needs under the system and to design their needs in a specific site, so to convince them on how to work with topography, with the natural ventilation, with the porches, with the eco or the passive techniques of the house in a place where security, it's a huge problem. So we deal a lot with security issues in terms of design to convince the people that porches were important to be exposed to the community, exposed to the city. So even through the process of construction, after the design process, we changed some things to adapt to the necessities of the security in order to avoid these kind of structures that it's what you have around the area. So it was very difficult to, let's say, not only convince them, but to help them to avoid this hermetic, secure architecture that goes against all the passive techniques of a house for this kind of weather. And then to convince them on how to think on the progressive part of the house. But well, it was amazing because probably 99% of the families, they were not only positive, but also happy to work with us. They were happy with this interaction and kind of collaboration with them in order to attend their specific necessities under the circumstances, not only of Acapulco, but also a system, because for obvious reasons, it was impossible to go and design everything completely different, we had to create some kind of boundaries and some kind of system, and inside that system, be flexible.
Well, I'm aware of time, and I want to make sure that people in the room and in the chat might have a moment to ask questions. We've got one in from Olivia de Butt, who thanks you for a wonderful presentation and for your ordering project. Hallelujah, he writes that architects like you are around to see what is important and why we create spaces instead of buildings. But he's also wondering about how the houses are connected to infrastructures, whether they're connected if they're self-sufficient, things like water and power, and how they kind of connect with the rest of the city, I suppose. And this is a reminder that if anyone else in the chat would like to ask any questions, then now is your chance.
Okay, well, obviously the houses are in urban areas, as you can see in the pictures. So we are connected to the energy system. We're connected to the water. We're not connected to the sewage. So the houses, and this was part of the deal. They were responsible of doing the microbiotic sewage cistern. And again, I think that the relevant part was to show them how not to be connected to the idea of a system, the dependency on air conditioning and other things that are present North American way of thinking are forcing the people to live with. We show them how to go back in history and see how we can have beautiful and very nice interiors without the use of air conditioning.
That's great, thank you. And we've also got a question from Jennifer Webb, who's asking how the houses deal with the seismic requirements. And maybe just to add to her question, one of the things I found most fascinating in your presentation is that we know that this condition of extreme weather is becoming ever more present and that people's houses are being destroyed at ever higher rates. And I wonder if you could maybe just distill some of what you've learned about working in houses and housing in post-disaster environments from this project. So this is about seismic requirements and how you're dealing with kind of the possibility of future natural disasters and events, but also what you've learned about working in post-disaster sort of architecture, I suppose, from this project in general.
Well, these houses are designed under the structural requirements of Mexico that are very strict, let's say, in terms of earthquakes. The hurricane was another kind of problem. It was about the wind. So the houses and this cross ventilation system allow the houses not to be, let's say, a resistance against hurricane. A year later, the project was hit by another hurricane called John, and it was a very positive reaction of the architecture and the houses to that second hurricane. So that was our first test, let's say. But again, I think that, and let's say that with the thing that I'm happy with is that this is a specific project for a specific community in a specific site. No, you can't repeat this in other parts of Acapulco. You can't repeat this in other places in Mexico, and you can't repeat this in other countries. No, what you can repeat is the philosophy, the conversations with authorities, private sector, and these intangible things that can gather talent. No, I think that the most relevant part of this project, not only for me, I think, but also for the office, is that houses and housing projects can't be repeated. I think that instead of having a star architect resolving all the emergency problems in the world, we need thousands of offices and thousands of architects helping their localities with their local problems, their local capacities, and their local necessities. So I think that, again, for me, the most positive and happy part of this project, it's to understand that, that we can export philosophies, but we can't export architecture.
The very inspiring words. And for anyone who maybe would be liking to think of themselves as their own localities, acupuncturist, therapist, architect, this is your last chance, I think, to ask a question of Manuel before we wrap up. And thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. If there's anyone left in the room who'd like to ask a question, please raise your voice or ask a question now.
We're conscious we're just very slightly over time, and with these Zoom meetings, things can be very back to back, but we're so grateful, Manuel, to have had you. It was brilliant to kind of see more of those insights, to share as well an update of what's been happening since we were in touch about kind of publishing the project. Stella and Mike, thank you again for your time. I think it's really valuable to have the judges in conversation with the architect behind the project. Thanks, Ruben, for brilliantly chairing this conversation, and to all of you who joined us virtually. We'll be sharing a recording of this event to allow for kind of multiple time zones and people who might not have been able to make it today to listen to this conversation. So thanks again to all. Please stay in touch with the AR and take care. And this is now going to disappear as Zoom do so. Goodbye.
Bye.